Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our show. We are just starting up here with Lynne McTaggart, and as you can see, Lynne is right here. We've had a little bit of troubles with the video, so Lynne's going to be joining us on the restream here just through audio. Lynne, can you hear us okay?
I sure can. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here.
We'll see if I can hear in between. If I don't screw it up, I'll try and find a picture that I can put up here for you. But we've got Lynne for just a short period of time, so we wanted to get into some of the big questions that came up after our talk. And so if you haven't checked it out, go check out the episode that we did with Lynne McTaggart a little while ago. We really went into stuff around intention and manifestation and healing and the power of group intention. And it was really a well-received interview. So go and check that out if you haven't heard it. But today what we're going to actually get into, because a lot of the questions that came up were specifically around Lynne's platform that is called What Doctors Don't Tell You.
And you had trouble finding this.
Well, when I first did it, I couldn't find it. I had to find it through your Facebook. And then today when I found it, I was actually able to find it more easily. So I don't know if sometimes it gets out of the algorithms to come up very easily, but this is a really wonderful platform. I really admire the work that Lynne's done over the years, and she's been an avatar in this area, bringing information around alternative medicine and basically all the stuff that you just won't hear in the mainstream that needs to be brought awareness to. And so today, some of the questions we're going to get into specifically are around what is currently going on. We're going to talk about stuff tied around the statistics with COVID. We're going to look at some of the stuff around transparency with the medical intervention with the jab. And we're going to get into some of the details because Lynne knows a fair bit about this. So Lynne, maybe where we can start, because I think this might be a good place to begin, is first, question was around how has media, news, and journalism been hijacked? And maybe particularly the sort of interwebbing of big pharma, PR firms, and what we consider news or media organizations. And maybe take it from there. And
she's had firsthand
experience. You've had firsthand experience with this, and you've also seen it from a journalist side, but you've also been exposed to it firsthand as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've seen this as a journalist over the years. In the 30 years, we have been publishing a publication called What Doctors Don't Tell You, which started out as a newsletter and is now an international magazine in languages. We were heroes in the very beginning when we started in 1990. And now this kind of information is the devil. And that is largely because the creeping corporatization of media. As you said, the media is now owned by large corporations like the Murdoch Corporation, and it's populated, and the advertising is populated largely by large organizations, including those of big pharma. So, for instance, on News Corporation, which is Murdoch's vast news corporation, one of his sons, who was a major player in the organization, was on the board of one of the pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical companies. So this is not just in a Murdoch organization. I mean, a very left-wing publication, newspaper in the UK, where The Guardian, has on its website virtually all big pharma ads. So this kind of influence is permeated there, but there's something else that's happened to journalism that me, as an old-time journalist, find horrifying. I mean, I became an investigative reporter after being a young woman, a young girl, watching Woodward and Bernstein take down a corrupt presidency. And I thought, yes, the Fourth Estate, that's their job, to take the foot of government and hold it to the fire. Well, that's not happening now. I was astonished to see there was a report called the Hart Report. It was put together by 51 top doctors, scientists, healthcare specialists, academics, all put together analyzing the government's response to COVID and criticizing it. And guess what? It was attacked by the newspapers, attacked, and they were essentially defending the government, and they belittled this by calling it anti-vaxxing. They were anti-vaxxers. And that is a wonderful, disparaging term just used to deal with anybody these days who is simply asking good questions. And that's exactly what this publication was. So I'm watching the news and journalists now not being, holding governments to account, which is our function, but actually being the government's spokespersons. And this is an extraordinarily dangerous precedent, because when you stop having a free press, you stop having democracy. Oops. Hi.
Sorry about that. And you said a good point there too, Lynn, when what you see so much right now, and I mean, it's like as soon as you have a comment, and a lot of times people should be questioning certain things. I mean, if you're actually paying attention to stuff, there's a lot of things that don't add up. And this is why people should actually question certain things. But what is happening is as soon as it does, there tends to be wording that gets used to sort of categorize you into an extremist. It's like as soon as you start to have a question about something that I think any logic would dictate that you should have certain questions coming up. But you get termed as an anti-vaxxer or a conspiracist or even a racist very quickly. You sort of get separated to try to discredit the person for even coming up with a question.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is what is going on now. Questioning is being shut down. For instance, I mean, I'm talking about UK where I live, but this is really happening everywhere. Our cases from COVID have fallen precipitously. I mean, they are falling through the floor. We now have 40% of the UK population vaccinated. We have about a third of the population exposed to COVID in all forms. We've got about 80% of the population who don't get a bad reaction when they do get it. So logic would dictate you can open up the country now. It's still in total lockdown. The government is now saying we can't travel abroad over the summer. And they've just got an overwhelming majority in Parliament to renew an act that gives the government wartime powers to pass laws without going through Parliament, or indeed allowing any sort of independent debate. So that's pretty scary. It's really basically saying the government has a new mandate to do what it likes without debate. And that includes protest is now against the law. Now, I'm not one of those people who is, who's arguing about a plandemic. There seem to be two extremes: the people who are in favor of what's going on, and the people who believe it's all a big conspiracy to take over the world. I'm not that. I'm right in the middle of a questioning journalist, which is what I'm supposed to be. And I'm finding loads of things that don't add up, like those numbers. Why are we doing this? Why are we saying, if everybody who is vulnerable has already been vaccinated in this country, why carry on with this? There's no logical sense to it.
Well, and then I think that's then what stirs on the wide array of different thinking about what could be going on, because when you're not getting clear answers, it opens up to, well, then what is going on? And that's where you're trying to figure out. People are trying to understand the bigger story. Now, one of the key things is that the mandates are primarily based on the numbers and the stats that are coming up. Now, you had a really interesting conversation with Dr. Bhakti. He was one of my I think both of our favorite people that started speaking up early on. We really admired him. And you had an interesting conversation with him. And so people that don't know Dr. Bhakti, he's medical microbiologist at the University of Mainz. He's an eminent virologist who's published over 300 scientific papers in the fields of immunology, bacteriology, virology, and he's received numerous awards, including the German Order of Merit. And I mean, really, really documented person. And he wrote a book with Dr. Rice named called Corona False Alarm. Now, you had a conversation with him specifically around sort of the numbers and stuff, and maybe you can just share that a little bit with what you learned from talking with him.
Well, yeah, I mean, what we found was that he said what we've been, and he documented what we've been saying all along, which is that the actual numbers, well, he said numerous things. Number one, the numbers are suspect because the PCR test that's used to test for coronavirus is extraordinarily wrong. You know, it has a very, very high percentage of false positives. So we don't have anywhere near as many cases as we thought we have. And if you notice, when they talk about deaths, it's deaths within 28 days of a positive coronavirus test. And he was also saying that in Germany, where he lives, and it's the same thing here, we heard from healthcare specialists who were saying people were dying of cancer and they wrote down COVID. People were dying of pneumonia and they wrote down COVID. People were dying of accidents, road accidents, and they were writing down COVID. So the numbers are really inflated. Now, why is this? I think what's happening, as I say, I don't believe that there is a international master plan to take over the world. I think what's going on is, you know, they're getting rubber stamped. I mean, I know here in the UK, every night on the news, we see more cases of people gasping for breath in the hospital, in intensive care units. We see the nightly figures. We see the nightly supposed deaths and supposed cases. And people are scared to death. And it's all over everywhere. Billboards, everything. You know, stay home, save lives, protect the virus, you know, or protect the NHS, save lives. And so people are scared to death. So what our government is doing is following opinion polls. People want this. And what I don't think they understand is they're dealing with information that is shut down, is incomplete. I mean, for instance, how much information does everybody out there hear about the side effects of these vaccines? Is anyone hearing any of it? You know, there have been 92,000 serious side effects, including death, in the UK alone. In the UK alone, where is that being reported? So the information isn't getting out there that people need. And all opinion polls say now that people are in favor of border lockdowns, of lockdowns in general, of, you know, vaccine passports, of essentially handing over their rights to the government. And the government, which is, we have a libertarian government, but or a liberal government, this government is following the opinion polls and saying, oh, goody. So yeah, we'll keep those emergency powers for 6 more months. So I have a feeling this is what's going on. The public is scared stiff. The information they're getting is not complete or wrong. The emphasis is on the vaccine is going to save everybody, even though nobody is putting those dots together. For instance, the vaccines don't prevent the virus from being passed on. The vaccines don't prevent you from getting it. They only prevent you, they say, from dying if the vaccine itself doesn't cause a side effect. So the idea that, you know, this is the holy grail isn't really fair. It's not fair. And now they're talking about the fact that children ought to get it. Children who get, you know, who don't even get coronavirus, or if they do, it's so mild, they oftentimes don't know about it. So the information we're getting is wrong. And so it's pretty difficult for us to make a considered opinion if we're not getting the information from the regular news organizations who are just cheering on governments, and we're not getting any discerning questioning of what is going on here, of what the government is doing.
I guess that's the part that I have the hardest time understanding then, as far as why is it such incomplete and wrong information? I mean, why is there such little transparency around all of it?
Okay, well, let's forget the whole idea of a conspiracy, because a conspiracy implies a lot of competence in getting this all together and creating this vast international master plan. I think the government started to see bodies in corridors in New York, in Italy, etc., and got scared to death and thought about the optics of having people in corridors in the rest of America or the rest of the UK. I mean, not so much in America because Trump really resisted any kind of lockdowns, but over here in the UK, that completely freaked them. So although they had been against a lockdown, they thought, well, Wuhan did it. And so and other places are doing it, so we better do it. It was all about optics, how it's going to look. And then they kept saying things that weren't working. You know, they were trying track and trace, that didn't work. They set up new hospitals, they didn't have the manpower for it, woman power for it. And they suddenly had over 100,000 deaths supposedly attributed to COVID. So this looked really bad. Everything they were doing was stupid. They didn't have enough protective equipment. They looked really bad. So they had to look good. So they've invested pretty much all of their eggs into the whole idea of the vaccine. So by doing so, of course, they're going to lock down any information saying the vaccine is less than perfect or it causes some side effects. So they're not being transparent about it so people can make an informed decision. So please understand, I'm not arguing definitively against the vaccine. I'm telling you what you need to know to make an informed decision. And one of the things you need to know is this is a medication. This is a novel product that is in phase 3 trials. It has temporary license because it hasn't gone through the full safety trials. So we are part of the experiment. We're part of the phase 3 trials, essentially.
And I mean, that's definitely been my point of view for a long time, has been it needs to be around informed consent and free choice. And informed consent can only be done when you have all of the information and things are transparent. And when I talk to patients that have gone through that or thought about it, it's like most of the time what they're aware of is only one tiny little piece of things. So then I understand why they would be thinking certain choices make a lot of sense to them because they don't know a lot of other information. And part of it, it's like a very individual thing, but you need to know all the different pieces. And you'd mentioned something there around transparency with it. I think was really important is that, I mean, when I went through the Pfizer study, it was essentially the trials were not designed to study effects on infection, hospital admission, intensive care use, and death. They essentially were really shown to really possibly lower, from a relative risk point of view, mild symptoms of COVID-19 to maybe moderate. Nobody in the study actually died, and nobody really had severe complications. So they can't even really, that wasn't even really studied initially.
No, and usually these trials are very short, so they don't look at what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So far, and these numbers are already out of date. We have had in the UK. UK, remember, is the size of New York State. It's got more population. It's got about 65 million. It's about 1/5 the size of the US. But the yellow card system is something that doctors report on when they want to report on a side effect. They figure that this is only a small percentage of what actually happens because many doctors don't put 2 and 2 together or don't feel that they believe so much in the vaccine, they say it cannot happen. But for instance, there have been thus far reported nearly 69,000 cases of nervous system disorders, everything from seizures and strokes to loss of sense of taste. And there have been 20 deaths in that batch. There have been over 3,000 and nearly 3,500 heart disorders, including 65 deaths. There have been 3,000 over 3,000 cases of swollen lymph nodes. There have been 332 reports of facial paralysis, and many, many more deaths. And America, they've, I mean, the AstraZeneca hasn't even been given emergency use or authorization, but there's already been 38,000 adverse events. And with the two other vaccines used in the US, Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines. Now, that is, again, out of date by now, and also represents about 1% of adverse events that are ever reported to the vaccine adverse event reporting system. So this is what's happening. And what's also kind of frightening is the deaths that have occurred among the elderly, who are the first batch to receive the vaccines, the ones that are supposed to be protected. So this is the kind of information that we have a right to have. I mean, this is what is outrageous. I mean, UNESCO has essentially, it has essentially an advisory that basically and the UK is a signatory of this, one of the countries that basically says that no medical treatment can be given to an individual without their full informed consent. So that in itself would argue against making this mandatory or even receiving it without full information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And Lynn, can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on in the UK and throughout Europe right now with regards to the COVID pass or the green pass? Because we know this is something that's being implemented in Israel right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's being floated right now. Now, in the UK, vaccination is not mandatory, even for children. So, and the UK has a background of not making vaccines mandatory, but we'll see. I mean, they're now talking about having this little vaccine passport on your phone, even to enter a pub, into a pub, a sporting event, a theater, let alone to travel. So they're talking about having this for everything. But there's a lot of issues there. That would mean you'd have to vaccinate the whole population, every single person, if they wanted to go on vacation. That would mean you'd have to vaccinate all of the young people who don't need to, just in order to have that passport, an 18-year-old to go into a pub. Now, there's no danger of them if they get COVID. The risks well outweigh any possible benefit. They're not a group at risk, and yet they would be forced to. I think this will be challenged, but it's certainly certain government officials are floating this and looking into it and working on it. And as I say, I think it would be challenged in court because of, and I will read exactly what this says. This would probably cover all of Europe too. There is essentially, let's see, let me just pull this up. Hang on one sec. But I think there is a kind of UK and also EU-wide directive against forcing anybody to have any kind of medication, any adult having any kind of medication. So I think that it could be easily challenged. It could be, we are allowed by UNESCO, essentially this directive, to have agency over our whole bodies, and I think that that will protect us. But it's, we're seeing this in the US too. They're talking about this, that even in the US, in order to go anywhere, in order to do anything, you're going to have this passport. I think this can be challenged because I've always said this about vaccines. How can you make something mandatory when you cannot guarantee it's safe? How can you do that to someone? That is so fundamentally against human rights. So I think what will end up happening is it will get challenged. And let's hope it does.
Yeah, I agreed. And I know that's been one of my main concerns around any kind of mandation on any medical treatment is that it takes out the individuality of the person. And as we know, every individual has very different patterns. They have different genetics, they have different epigenetics, all these things. So they react differently to different therapies. I mean, we see this in practice all the time. So it's one of the reasons why I think you really can't mandate almost anything because it doesn't really make sense. There's always going to be a potential for harm at some point for some person.
Yeah, to make mandatory is, I mean, I've never agreed with it being mandatory where the state can take over from parent on the child. But this is, the UNESCO has this it's a universal declaration on bioethics and human rights. It was passed in 2005. Many countries signed it, including the UK. And according to Article 6, which people can look up, any preventive, diagnostic, or therapeutic medical intervention is only to be carried out with the prior, free, and informed consent of the person concerned, based on adequate information. The consent should, where appropriate, be express and may be withdrawn by the person concerned at any time and for any reason without disadvantage or prejudice. Now, a vaccine passport goes against that. That takes away your ability to walk out your front door and congregate with other people in any place, like a pub, like a theater, like a sports event, without undergoing this medical intervention. So I think it can easily be challenged because this is saying, in effect, we can't be coerced against our will to get vaccinated, particularly when we don't have adequate information, as in how many side effects, who is at risk from it more than others, how effective is it really over time, what about the variants they're talking about, and so forth. Now they're talking about, new vaccines for new variants. Well, what about the collective effect of all of that? And if you've already had COVID, what happens if you get the vaccine? Many people are talking about that. If you've already had COVID and you get the vaccine, that will potentiate side effects, that will make them worse. So all of this information, rather than just blasting this out for political reasons, we have a right to get this information.
Lynne, are you aware if Israel had signed into UNESCO as well?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't know, but it's worth looking into. I think it's worth challenging this and I think everybody, I'm dusting off my placard, guys, because, the placards I had back, decades ago, when the government in America, where I lived at the time, was doing this, that, and the other. And we were all protesting against it. Well, it's time to do it now because let me just explain. There was a giant demonstration last weekend against lockdown policy. There may have been about 35,000 protesters all around Parliament in the UK. It was broken up as illegal. The right, and they were peaceful, they weren't smashing things, they weren't doing anything, they were just marching. And it was broken up by the police. So now let's think about all of this, because the worry for me isn't COVID anymore. The worry for me is just the erosion completely of liberal democracy. Let's look at this. So if vaccine passports are passed, we won't have agency over our own bodies. We won't have the right to debate we're not having the right to debate or disagree or protest, meaning we can't, disagree with the government. And now our media has abandoned its role of holding government to account and actually protecting it against any sort of criticism. Well, we don't have a democracy anymore. And if we're voting for all of this in the opinion polls, we have to wake up and see the bigger issues here. This is the real fear I have, is what happens next with this? We have just allowed the government to take away all of our freedoms. Now what?
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest fear for us now too, and a lot of people in the circle that we sort of are aware of. And yeah, it's like, and then where does it go from there? It's sort of, it's like when things sort of get taken to a point, they don't always just get given back. It's like sometimes things take a turn and then they don't just go back. They kind of carry on in that direction. So it's one of those things where I feel like it could be a slippery slope. And I agree with you. I think it's the time where we do need to kind of be globally start to become aware of that more and start to act around it.
We do have to start to act around it, and in giant force, because what's happening, we have to change the climate of opinion. What's happening is they are hearing, the people voting in opinion polls are hearing one side of the story from a media that is coward. I mean, there's organizations like Ofcom over here that essentially control licensing for the media, et cetera. And they have pressured them not to have on people who are criticizing the government. They're pressuring them to put together, a certain narrative. This has been demonstrated. And many of the scientists who were on some of the, breakfast TV shows, et cetera, were talking about how they were told not to go into certain things. And so they're getting dictated to. This is like, wartime propaganda, essentially. So the problem is people are scared, and so they are voting for the government they're voting for security, they're voting for protection, and they don't realize how dangerous that is, what a slippery slope that is. And so I think what we need to do is challenge things like a vaccine passport. I've seen that there are a number of very brave lawyers willing to take this on. I think we need to start doing global marches, global protests, and global, places where we can broadcast this information to get it out to people, because of course even Facebook is shutting this type of stuff down. Google and Facebook are shutting it down. And so it's more important than ever that this be out there and that the true narrative reach the people and not what they're being told, not just dismissing anybody who asks a question as an anti-vaxxer. And for people to really understand that this is medical McCarthyism by any other name.
Lynne, as far as getting together and sharing information and kind of uniting in solidarity against what we see is going on, if it's going down a dark pathway, can you kind of speak of, I see that as being almost like a group intention where we're coming together with a similar mission. Can you speak of how group intention in that sense would almost create this, the 100 monkey theory effect?
Well, I think it starts in small groups. I mean, as you know, I've been really promoting Power of 8 groups, and I see miracles every day with these groups. I see miracles between the groups themselves and outward. So I think you start with creating your own Power of 8 group. You start connecting with other Power of 8 groups. They start connecting with other Power of 8 groups. And you start a global movement this way. And, when people think, oh my God, how can we start a global movement? Well, the answer is every important major change in history has started out with a tiny group of people. And as Margaret Mead famously said, that's the only thing that ever makes change is a small group. So I think it's something like that. We have to start small. I mean, because when you're small, you're under the radar for a while. And then you can start essentially covertly connecting with other people. And suddenly it becomes a large group and a larger group and a larger group. And it's easier than ever to reach other people through all of the media that we do have, all the media we have on the internet and elsewhere.
Yeah, Lynn, I think that's a wonderful way to kind of wrap this up too, because I know we're on time here.
If there's anything else she'd want.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we finish up?
Well, just to check out our website, wddty.com. We've been covering COVID since last March. We have stories every month. We have major stories about and in-depth stories about the vaccine, potential side effects, the vaccine and how it was made, how to protect yourself naturally. We've talked to doctors who are doing integrative specialists, and we have that again on our other website to getwell.solutions. We have interviews about immune system resilience. We have interviews. We have a 4-part COVID battle plan. So you can see all of our material. And also, if you're feeling alone, particularly now, maybe you're locked down, whatever, I have a Facebook page and a community. The Facebook page that I'm talking about is not my main page, but a thing called Connecting and Healing Through the Power of 8. And I set it up about a year ago during the first lockdown to basically say, look, you're feeling alone, you're feeling isolated, get together with a Power of 8 group. And so people are putting up signs to create Power of 8 groups all over the place, and we have thousands of people doing so, as we do on my community site of lynnmctaggart.com. So don't feel that you're isolated. There are many, many, many millions of people like you who believe what you do and want to make change together.
That's
wonderful. Lynn, thank you so much for your time. And Lynn's going to be joining us again
on April 2nd with at our roundtable with Dr. Todd, with Dr. Northrup, Huna Flash, as well as Dr. McCready. So that'll be an amazing discussion. We're looking forward to that, and we thank you in advance for your participation, for your collaboration, Lynn, and thanks so much for Laura for coordinating these meetings as well.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks so much.
All right, Lynn, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much. And thanks very much for joining.
Bye-bye.